Carmen, welcome back.
I'm back.
You are. It's good to be back. It'll be your last appearance because we're almost done here,
Oh,
right? But there's
all
things
right.
afoot for year two. But anyway, so we
Okay.
are in Mark 13 to 16. And then we're doing Numbers 8 to 24. I have something right off the bat in verse 2 of Mark 13, which is a little controversial because I got to come right out of the gate with that. But it says there, they're talking about the temple. The disciples are talking to Jesus, and Jesus says to the disciples as they're talking about the temple, not one stone will be left on top of another. So that whole Wailing Wall thing, there's questions as to is Israel, whatever. I'm not going there. I'm just saying that there's high evidence that that is the retaining wall of the fortress of Antonia that the Roman legion pitched its tents on, a Temple Mount, on the top of Temple Mount. But I am totally willing to own the fact that there have been so many prayers said at that place that that place has something to it, but it cannot be the part of the old temple because the Bible says not one stone will be left on top of one another. So if you believe the Bible, that ain't the temple.
All right. So, Mark 13, the disciples are curious about the signs of the end and what's going to happen. And Jesus just pivots and he's like, don't be deceived. Like, all this stuff's going to be flying around and it's not going to be about all this stuff. Don't be deceived. Let's focus on the main thing. The main thing is you're likely going to be deceived, but don't be deceived. So, all the tracking of the signs and the things. And he's like, don't be deceived. So I just thought that was interesting how he kind of pivots away from the signs of the end. Not that they're not important, because I do feel like they're there for a reason. See the signs and know, but the main point being deception is coming. Don't fall for it.
Well, and obviously, my eschatology is going to scream Mark 13 is totally and utterly about the end and how it already happened. I find quite a few verses. 26, then everyone will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. I actually believe they saw that because the earth is flat and that it's not about the silicone tech and people seeing it on a screen, that they actually physically saw him. And he says in 30, I tell you, this generation will not pass from the scene before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear. So he's talking, and a generation is 40 years. So 40 years from the point at where he said that, and probably not an entire 40 because he was already 33. So what are we mathing? But at most, from that moment in time, 40 years later, I believe that he did return. And also in 13:10, for the good news must be first preached to all the nations. I feel like that word, and I saw a couple of different channels talk about this in an interesting way, and language matters. Obviously, that's my
Hmm.
gig. But it was talking about known world. Like it says
Hmm.
here, for the good news must be preached to all the nations in this particular NLT verse, which is much more phrase for phrase. Whereas I think it says will be told to the world, but it's known world, and known is not translated there. And yet you have your sphere of influence, your family, your direct neighbor, your
Hmm.
parents, maybe even if they're not in that city where you live right next to you. And
Hmm.
then there's the sphere of influence, all of your acquaintances, people you meet at jobs, people, customers you serve at a job, this kind of thing, which is a wider sphere. And then you have nations, and you have the Prince of Persia that Michael had to help Gabriel with so that Gabriel could get through to Daniel, kind of thing. And those are principalities. And so in terms of all the nations, the talks that I heard talked about it in relation to known world, like the Roman known world. But and there are Roman ruins everywhere. But I digress. And so for me, this is a huge eschatology chapter. But I love that your point, it's about the fact that you need to focus on Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's so easy to get distracted about all the is it true? Is it not true? All the things. What's a sign? What's not a sign? Oh, it must mean something. It's so easy to get wrapped up in all these things, and then you end up taking your eye off the main thing. And he repeats 3 times, like, be awake, stay awake, pay attention, and yet don't be distracted. Be awake, but don't be distracted. Be awake, but don't be deceived. Feels like this dance between chaos and focus.
Indeed. And I love here 14:9. I tell you the truth, whoever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. And here you and I are sitting discussing it. Well done, lady. Well done.
Well
Right?
done.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she doesn't get named. And I had faltered. I don't remember if it was a previous review or one that's coming up, but I was like, it was, what was it? It was something that had happened very early Old Testament and a name was given. And then I said, there's lots of people in the Bible that are named like, and then I couldn't come up with one. And here's one. It's kind of funny. Anyway. And I also also highlighted 14:16, which to me was funny because so many times Jesus tells the disciples to do something that is it's not weird, but, like, when he gets the donkey on Palm Sunday, and he
Mhm.
specifically tells him, "Okay, go in here," and he's like, "If you're and so you're untying someone else's donkey, like, if someone walked up untying my horse, I'd be
Right.
like, "Excuse me? What do you think
Yeah.
you're doing?" Like, I would instantaneously be, "What are you doing here?" I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
only the people there are from the barn, but still, this was something, and yet he just says, "Go into the city," and they found the just 2 disciples went into the city and found everything as Jesus, and yet the disciples get freaked out about things like when Jesus raises people from the dead and when he calms the storm. And yet this is just as freaky to me. It's like, how did he know? Like, what? This is so weird.
You'll know.
Yeah.
So I was reading through this and I remembered hearing something, so I went back and I dug into it a little bit. Are you familiar with during the Passover, the 4 cups that they talk about? If you
Kind of
do
sorta, but take me through it.
the
Yeah.
regular Passover Seder. So there's 4 different cups that they drink from. The first cup is the cup of sanctification. God chooses us to be holy, separated people. So there's the messianic interpretation of things, but there's also the Hebrew interpretation of things is how they look at it. So they have the cup of sanctification, they have the cup of deliverance. According to some of the teachings, not all of them, but according to some of them, Jesus potentially did not do the third cup, but how when he's in the Garden of Eden or Garden of Eden, the Garden of in the garden and
Gethsemane.
he's praying and he says, "Remove this cup from me." That third cup is the cup of redemption, and it talks about the bride price. Like this is the price to be paid for our salvation. And so the thought is potentially he didn't drink from that third cup, but that's what he's referring to in the garden as he's praying, "Please remove this cup from me." And then the fourth cup
Interesting.
is hope, or as we're looking forward to. So what's interesting about this is part of this whole like Passover ritual is also a part of like a marriage proposal,
Mhm.
where the man he basically offers his potential bride to be a cup and basically says, "Will you drink from my cup?" And if she does, then that's basically a sign that she's
Right.
accepting his proposal. And then after that point, the male goes away to his parents' house, doesn't drink from the cup again until they're married, but he goes away to his father's house and he prepares a home for her there. And then when he's done, he doesn't know when he's done. He only knows when he's done when the father says, "Okay, that's good enough. Go get your bride." So the
Right.
correlation between like that and, John 14, where Jesus is saying, "I go to prepare a house for you. And when I come, you don't know, but be
Right.
ready." He's talking about that. And then also the fact that where is it? Something about the fourth cup, the fact that he's going away, like
Right.
okay, so the
In
bride, I'm kind of
between, there'll be
going
a lot
over,
of
I'm
time
thinking
and you
through this
don't
at the
know what
same
to
time.
say. Yeah, because we do weddings so differently today.
Right, but the bride, the bride to be, she's supposed to drink, and every time she drinks, it's a remembrance of him and who
Yeah.
she's gonna be getting married to. So this whole, like, "Do this in remembrance of me," it's like a foretelling of the bride of Christ
Wow.
remembering, like, he's coming to get you, that whole thing. So, because she's supposed to drink, he's not supposed to drink. So just the correlation of, like, the things that we see
Interesting.
in this chapter and how it's tied to the other chapters and just some of the I love reading about just traditional Passover. So anyway, I thought it was super cool some of the great correlations and the hymns that they sing. So there's a hymn And typically it's from Psalms, 1 is like the great hymn or whatever is typically the one that they would have sung during that time. So just reading those words and kind of how Jesus said it, how he might have done it, what we have as the bride of Christ to look forward to anyway.
Well, that was
I
very
just thought that was
profound,
kind of
Carmen,
cool.
because I had a very base thing. I had looked at where he talks about just 22, 23, and he's saying what to do. And the Bible talks about all over the Old Testament, don't drink the blood, don't drink the blood. And I just wrote a note that says communion to a non-believer would be totally weird. And
Oh, totally. Totally.
it's like, here's some wine, which is representative of my blood, and here's some bread, which is representative of my body. Eat it. And you're like, no,
Totally.
no, thanks. Like, that's weird. I don't want to drink your blood or eat your flesh. Right. And
Yep.
yet, as a Christian, as a believer, those are very, very symbolic things talking about what you were saying. So, yeah, I
Mhm.
think if you came to this as a non believer, you'd sort of think these people are really weird, and this is a very weird thing to be doing.
Yeah. But also on the flip side of that, like if you're Jewish and kind of the significance of like the Passover and the different cups and the proposal, and then you read Jesus's words like, I will
Yeah.
not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it in the new kingdom of God. Like, and even with all the prophecies, like when we're going to be reading in Numbers, there's prophecies from Isaiah in there. It's like how are they?
Yeah.
But
Connected. Yeah.
it just boggles my mind that looking backwards, it seems so like, duh, it's right there.
At the time, it would have been weird, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yep.
Yeah, in 14, I love the fact that it talks about John running away naked. It's this one young man. So, and I do know that people think that this is John, but you and I have dug into this and we're not sure. I talked about this with the big fisherman of having the origin be something which is in this passage, which is kind of interesting. Not the big fisherman, but the Roman soldier and where that book came from. It's a historical fiction called The Road by Lloyd C. Douglas, and it's a Roman centurion. And in this section of Mark here, the Roman centurion says, surely he was God. And that's kind of where the whole story jumps off of. And it's a brilliant book because it's totally a work of fiction, and yet it's true to the truth of who Christ is and gives a little bit of extra in there, which I don't think is bad. I think it's creativity and storytelling. But yeah, so this man runs away in a linen shirt. It's like, what? Why is he naked? And it is only written in Mark. I did look that up. It's not anywhere else. But
Hmm.
and then further on down there, just a couple of verses later in 55, the second of it, but they couldn't find any, meaning they couldn't. You're trying to put him to death. They're trying. All the witnesses are contradicting each other, and so they're having this farce of a trial, and they can't find anybody to say anything other than the fact that he said he destroyed the temple, which is clearly false because he said, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it in 3 days." But again, we're back to looking at the stones, and why are they looking at the stones at the temple? It's kind of an interesting one. And I also
Yeah.
for me too, again, same thing with 1462. You will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand, coming in the clouds. And he is talking to Caiaphas at that time. And for me, that's another huge eschatology verse. But I loved to go backwards just before we leave. Well, sorry, two things before we leave chapter 14. One, going back to verses 38 when Jesus is praying in the garden. And we've all had this before where every teenager that has ever been to a sleepover in their life, they're trying to stay awake because it's so much fun. And yet they're laying there and their eyes are just falling and they're falling asleep and they can't help themselves. We've all had it happen to us. Some situation of where you were supposed to stay awake and you just are so tired that you cannot, and you just feel so badly for them. And yet you think of Jesus suffering like this, and these are his people, and they can't stay awake. And they didn't know what to say to him. Like, they don't even know what to reply to him. And the same here going to the end of 14 with Peter, and Peter's denial of him and the rooster crying. That
Uh-huh.
had to have been the most devastating blow to a human. I mean, just
Like,
knowing that you just had
oh,
this, no, I'm going to die with you.
right.
And then you
I'm
can't
not gonna
even,
do
yeah,
that.
right? Poor
Yeah.
Peter. Anyway.
Poor
I
Peter.
mean, I'd have done it too. I'd have been right there with him. But anyway, my next note is in 15. I kind of wondered, I thought about, well, why would you flog him and just crucify him? Just crucify him in the first instance. And when I looked some of this up, pretty gross. The Romans did that so that the person would be easier to crucify. Because if they've already been flogged once, then they're not in good shape.
Verse 44, Pilate was surprised to hear that he had already died.
Yeah.
So they bury him. Mary Magdalene and Mary see where he's buried.
I loved 16, the angels, right? Can you imagine your job as an angel is to hang out in the tomb that Jesus left, waiting to tell somebody? It's like, are they here yet? And obviously, the women are here
Yeah.
hurrying to the tomb and they're worried about who's going to, and then they get to make the announcement. But at the same time, Jesus had already left there. That would be a weird job. Like, hey, stay behind and tell somebody.
The young man was sitting there on the right side. It's like
Yep.
just another day, except it wasn't.
Right? Exactly.
Mm.
The thing I mentioned a minute ago is in 1539. When the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he died, he exclaimed, "This man truly was the Son of God." And so I highly, if you're into fiction, The Robe is a beautiful historical fiction book. I highly recommend it. Love this is my favorite fiction book, but it has truth in it.
Yeah. I have not read it. I've heard of it, but not read it. Let's see. So Jesus, or was it the angel said, "Go tell people," and they were afraid and didn't, and then they appeared to Mary Magdalene, and she went and told people, but they didn't believe. I'm
Well,
trying to
I
remember.
did look into this. Do you have the notes about the manuscripts in your Bible for 16? So one of them ends, chapter 16 ends at verse 8. And then later manuscripts had this second ending that goes from 9 to 20, which is sort of interesting to me because it almost seems like that there's two accounts in some senses. And then it's like, okay, no, this other account had this piece. And I'm sure some of it was just confusion, and it could have literally been a book that got ripped or something, like a papyrus that was ripped, and therefore you thought that it ended there, and so that's what they did and ended the book there.
Sure.
And then yet there's this second piece. Could have been that simple of a situation. I don't know. But when I looked at it, it was an interesting one, and I don't know
Mhm.
which Bibles have which bits, like which versions stop at 6:8 and which versions go to 16:20. But it was curious to me. And I loved in 1616, so this is after in that other section, go into the world and preach the good news to everyone. Anyone who believes and is baptized will be saved, but anyone who refuses to believe will be condemned. It's the gospel in one verse. Believe.
Yep.
All right. Oh, sorry. You got something?
Well, I was just gonna. I just thought it kind of funny that so back in verse 12. So he appears to Mary Magdalene. Jesus does. And then he appears to two disciples who were walking out in the country. So he appeared in another form to two of them. So what kind of form was he appearing? I was like, what? What? I don't know. It's just curious to me because Mary knew him. She recognized him. But when he appeared to these other two disciples, he appeared in another form to two of them. But obviously they knew it was him because they went back and told the others and they didn't believe. So,
I think that this is the road to Emmaus. This is Acts. That story is told to us, is my opinion. And that's just an
yeah,
opinion. That's not a
yeah,
fact connection. I'm not saying that the Bible says that that's what this is.
yeah,
I'm reading it and going, gosh, that seems quite similar.
right,
Probably that was
right.
Cleopas. Um, is what it's that there's a whole thing about which Cleopas it was. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say different
I
form,
thought the form was interesting. He appeared in
yeah.
another form. How many forms
Well,
did Jesus have?
right, but with Mary Magdalene, he says, "Don't touch me." Maybe there was a different, and he does later on, he appears to all the disciples, the 11, and he walks through walls in other descriptions of it. So,
Right.
I don't know, I mean, yeah, what is a resurrected body? He can eat, and then we're gonna get me being irreverent and base and saying, "Well, does he poop? Does he need to? Like, how does this work?" Okay, not go there, Beth. Like, stop, But these are the questions I have, right? So, but in a different form, what does that mean? And yet, with Mary, like I said, he tells her not to touch him and she literally, like it says, it doesn't say here. It would have to be. I think it's in John where she falls down and says, "Rabboni," which is teacher.
Mhm. Right.
Well, yeah. So Emmaus. So the walk to Emmaus is in Luke. Luke 13, 7 miles from Jerusalem. And he seems their eyes are veiled. So just like an angel can change forms or be something else,
Yeah,
maybe he
that's
was that.
true. Yeah, so that one gives you a little more detail.
The women were terrified. And Luke 24, she just tells the disciples. So let me see if there's anything in John. John 20:11, Mary was standing outside the tomb crying. But the question is if, and again, this is why some people look at this and say, well, you have all these different accounts. This can't really have happened. And yet, actually, if you and I witnessed the same accident, we would have seen and had the same experience. And yet, your description of it would be different than mine.
Absolutely.
That doesn't
Absolutely.
mean that it's not true, but it
Right.
is somewhat confusing for us trying to figure out, okay, well, who the players, what's going on here? We don't have a movie. All we have is a text version of it. And so you have to look after the fact and sort of dig into the things. So anyway, I thought that was a good
Yep.
one. The form. Yeah. I like that. What form was he in? All right. So numbers 8 to 24. This is something that for me was super helpful interpreting something forwards. So, 8:10. When you present the Levites before the Lord, the people of Israel must lay their hands on them. I have been in frozen chosen churches and I have been in happy clappy churches. And I use those words on purpose because that to me shows you the scale of which it could be and is minusculely slightly derogatory to each and not exactly like right. So it's one or the other, right? But you're on a
Yep.
spectrum, just like you have phrase
Sure.
for phrase translations and you have
Mhm.
word for word translations. And so, but in the happy clappy genre, you have people laying hands on each other. And it was only after reading the Bible, I went, "Oh, that's why you lay hands. Like Elisha giving, I knew that it happened from person to person, but
Yeah.
here it is literally the people laying hands on the Levites to intercede with them.
Like a
I thought that was,
commissioning.
yeah, yeah. But it had only occurred to me after reading this that that's what they were doing. Yeah. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
So I love about every time God gives an ordinance about, the temple or the tabernacle or what's supposed to go in it or how it's supposed to, like, he is very detailed, like down to the, like, it has to be hammered out with leaves and flowers of this kind that go around it like this. And it's like he doesn't leave anything to chance. Like everything is very specific and very intentional. Anyway, and you see that again in this chapter, like right off the beginning. I need 7 lampstands. They're supposed to be hammered out. Like this means they're artisans and they're working their craft and they're doing these things. It wasn't just this random like buy it from the neighboring tribe and they'll throw something together.
Yeah. I really liked in I'm moving on from 8, I'm in 9. So it said when you've got people there were people that were unclean because they had touched a dead body or had to touch a dead body or something or someone died, right? And there's a provision given here. And this is in 9:11. They must offer the Passover sacrifice 1 month later at twilight on the 14th day of the second month. And I was like, wait. Hang on. I've read something. And you're going to take us on a trumpet tour, I guess, next chapter with the same kind of thing where it bounces into your head that something. And this is Second Chronicles 30 and it's Hezekiah and there weren't enough priests. And so they do I literally my googling or my AI prompt was is there a king of Israel who celebrated the Passover late? And it's
Yes.
Hezekiah. And
Yep.
I went, okay, and so
Mhm.
here's the provision in Numbers that tells you that that's totally okay and legit. And I remember reading it in
Yeah.
Hezekiah and going, that doesn't
Mhm.
sound right. I mean, like, okay, he's trying to get to the spirit of it, and a month later, whatever. But it was sort of weird to me, and yet here is the provision.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, about being on a journey, but what's also so cool about this is like even if you have people who don't believe the way that you do, like they're traveling with you, they're a part of what you're doing, just tag alongs. There's another name of forum you'll see in a few chapters forward, but they do the things too. Doesn't matter if they don't believe, like, we're all doing this thing, and they're supposed to do all the rituals, they do celebrate the appointed things
Feast.
at the appointed time, you're included. So there's kind of this assimilation that's happening, like, if you're gonna be with the people and you're gonna travel with the people, you're gonna do what the people have to do to a point.
Mhm.
Thought that was interesting.
It is. My only note in 10 was, the trumpets will remind you of God will remind your God of his covenant with you. I am the Lord, and that's in 10 at the end of 10. But yeah, go on your trumpet tail.
Yeah, so he starts his setting up order. Here's how we're going to break camp, and here's when we're going to do it. And the trumpets are going to sound, and if it's this sound, you do this, and if it's that sound, you do that. And so, and here again, we have very specific information given about how the trumpets are supposed to be made. Like, again, they're supposed to be hammered out in the specific way, made out of silver. We often in the Bible, if there's a trumpet sound, it's a shofar. Well, this is not a shofar. It's very specifically a trumpet. So, and then the whole thing of like it being made from silver, there's so many cool things with silver. So, silver symbolizes purity and redemption. When they talk about I just read this. So when they talk about the redemption price of the firstborn male, it was given in silver. Like you need to pay so many whatever of silver for the redemption price. Jesus was betrayed for what?
30 pieces of
Silver.
silver. Yep.
Silver, right? So there's that kind of that redemption, like back to that redemption cup, redemption price thing again. Like it's all just
Mhm.
like circling around. Anyway, so cool. So redemption price of the firstborn male was given in silver. And then First Peter, he refers to it. Christ redeemed us with more than just silver. Like it wasn't just the redemption price. It was also, in his blood. And then another correlation too is that only the Levites were supposed to be blowing the trumpets. And then that whole correlation of like Jesus is the high priest. Um, just some of that, tying that together. So the trumpets were blown to celebrate, to warn, to go to battle, to worship, for burnt offerings, but also as a memorial and a reminder, which New Testament church trumpets also signify like the time of the rapture, like trumpets will be blown. And that also kind of is curious to me too, because again, it's that sound factor. Like, what about that sound it has some power to it, but what is it? We know that sound has power, and certain frequencies have certain kinds of power. And it's like, what is it about that frequency, that is, what change is it bringing about? Anyway, that's a random
No, I think it's very I
bunny
mean, the
trail.
old cathedrals and the windows and the sound that reverberates in one of those buildings, and we're back to the stone that the builder
Yeah.
rejected.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
this is again a shout out to Tyler. Always says everything comes from the Bible, and I read 10:35. Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. And there's a famous Christian song and I was like,
Yes.
oh, that's what it comes from. I mean, not obviously it came from the
Mhm.
Bible. That was the most logical thing, but I was like, oh, I remember
Mhm.
that. I know this
Yep.
refrain,
As a
and
kid,
I
right?
yeah, exactly. And then I also loved how it talks about the impartation to the 70 in 11. So this is Numbers 11. And he says, gather before me 70 elders. And he gives some of the spirit that's on Moses onto them so that he can help them decide. And yet it's 70 of them, which is very funny because Jesus sends out 72. But yeah, and then I went through a whole section here. It starts in 11:20. This is when they're complaining about meat. And it says, you will
Yeah.
eat of it for a whole month until you gag and are sick of it. And that's the
I know,
quail.
right? I read that and I was like, "Oh my gosh. You're
Yes,
gonna eat it until it comes out of your nose." Like, that sounds like something you'd say to your kid. Yeah.
it is. It's exactly what he says to his kids. And then it's even more. This is I'm gonna flip over and we can carry on correctly, but in 14 verse 28. I will do to you the very things I heard you say. You will all drop dead in this wilderness. So this is because they were like, oh, we're going to die out here because you took us out of Egypt. And when he says, okay, fine. And so often the punishment fits the crime in terms
Yeah.
of what God is saying, like, okay, this is what you're complaining about. This is what you're doing. All right, no problems. We can go there. And then
Yep. Try
in
me,
that,
right? Try me.
literally, literally. And have we not said that to our kids? Like, go for it. Let's see what happens. Like, yeah, try it on, kid. And I loved in the 70, this is in 11, like 26 to 29, there's two that don't show up and they're prophesying back in their tents. And
Mhm.
again, God finds you. no matter where you are, because they were anointed, they were named,
Yep.
they were part of the
Yep.
70 and they didn't show up. Now, does that mean that there were 72? I don't know. It's interesting. Was that 68 and then
So
70?
my interpretation is that there were 70 and they anointed 70 and 70 prophesied, but there were two more.
Uh,
So maybe
okay.
I might have read it wrong too, but
No, I mean, again, I'm in an NLT this version, and I really I'm getting so into the Septuagint lately, and so I've been reading in that and going, "Ooh, what does the Septuagint say?" But yeah, it
yeah.
was an interesting one.
Yeah.
Um,
So in the version that I read, it calls them tagalongs. And they
tagalongs?
were the ones that kind of instigated this. It caused them to crave these tagalongs, essentially caused the people to crave something that they didn't have. It's
That
like
was
they
yeah.
influence them to be like, "Oh, yeah, I don't have that." "Oh,
What did
yeah, I
this
do miss that." No, it's like they were
right?
distracted, and then all of a sudden out of that distraction comes the ungratefulness. And then you have Moses being like, "Why is this my fault? Why did
Where
you
is
give me
the
these ungrateful people to care for? These aren't mine, they're yours." He kind of goes on this drama queen rant. And God's
Yeah,
like, "Fine, like, get the leaders. I'll put my spirit on them." Um, and then like you said, because you complained about not eating meat, you're going to eat it till it comes out of your nose.
right.
Um, and then Moses is like, "What? You can do that?" Like,
It is funny. It's and
mm,
God refrain is like, "Has my arm shortened? Like, have I
right?
lost any power since
Right?
5 minutes ago when" and it wasn't 5 minutes, obviously, it's maybe a couple months, maybe you don't know how long, but a time period. It wasn't just yesterday. But 5 minutes ago, in quotation marks, he opens the Red Sea and you're worried about where I'm gonna get meat?
Yeah,
Like, really, Moses?
yeah.
And
I'm trying to
speaking
find.
of good.
Well, I was just saying, I was trying to find the verses where it refers to the rabble or the tagalongs. The different versions
Yeah.
will call them something different, but the idea persists that
Oh,
these
here
were
we
kind of
go. It's
external.
11:4. The foreign rabble. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, tagalongs, that's an interesting one. That's a much more modern version thing. Yeah,
I don't know what version that was. I tend to bounce between different ones and be like, "Oh, what's this one say? Oh, what's that one say?" And then you
right.
kind of mush them all together, and it gives you a little bit more of a complete picture sometimes. But yeah, the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and then the people of Israel wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat." It's
Yes.
like it was the rabble, like the tagalongs, that distracted them from remembering and from remembering the goodness of God and what he had done and where they were and why they were where they were. Oh, and it's all of a sudden it's like, "I want meat." Okay.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, so as we're moving along, just a little pre-warning here, Miles is gonna come back to talk about Genesis 6 and the incursion in Nephilim, but we have here in 13, all the descendants of Anak lived there. So this is a giant reference, and the people felt like grasshoppers in their eyes. But then we have in 1410, but the whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. And we always think of, and in chapter 13, all the names of the spies were given. And I thought it's interesting. They're named, and they died. And yet, this actually was serious. Like, they're talking about stoning Joshua and Caleb. So not only did Joshua and Caleb take a stand and then were rewarded by God for their stand, but it got really heated, very seriously heated. The people, there is a mob forming and they are ready to stone Joshua and Caleb.
Yep. So it's this little back and forth. Joshua and Caleb are like, "God is with us, we can do it." And everybody else is like, God hates us, we're gonna die. Let's go back to Egypt." And Joshua and Caleb are like, "Don't rebel, don't fear, everybody." And then everybody else is like, "Stone them." And God is like, "They hate me." And Moses is like, "No, don't kill them." It's all this like back and forth, like just sounds like utter chaos, right?
A
And
perfect
here's
render.
Moses, the meek Moses, like, "Oh, don't kill him.
Yeah.
Don't kill him. You'll make the Egyptians' dreams come true," is essentially what Moses says. The enemies
Which
will
was a clever
celebrate.
retort. It really
Right?
was.
I mean, he might have been meek and not a man of not many words, but he knew how to argue with God, I guess.
He did.
"You're better than that. Please forgive us." And God's like, "Okay, but you can't enter the promised land." So
Well, and
I,
that
I
comes
always,
go ahead.
I'm always intrigued by, God is angry and he's like, "These people need to be punished." And then you have that person that steps in. "Yeah, but what about this? And what about that? And God's like, okay, I won't do this, but I'm going to do that. You have the verse, who can change the mind of the Lord? Well, Moses, apparently.
Yeah.
Abraham did it.
Yep.
There's other people throughout the Bible who, it seems, changed the mind of the
Convinced
Lord.
God to change his mind. Exactly. Yeah. So intercession, very important, actually. I do find some of this whole section with Korah's rebellion and the earth swallowing them up and whatnot, it's very difficult. People think of, and it does happen here in a couple chapters later with the serpent and the snakes and a plague. But there was
Mhm.
a fire and a plague. And I remember reading through this and thinking, gosh, there's a lot going on here. Every chapter, there seems to be an opening, a denouement. And so
Yep,
there's a lot going on in this era in terms of, you think of Numbers as, okay, just a bunch of lists of names and some ordinances and, oh, here's the 10 commandments. And it's like, no, there's a lot more here than that.
definitely. Yeah, and here again, the people are mad. They come to Moses, and then God is like, okay, they have to die. And Moses is like, no, don't kill them. But they die in a plague until Aaron makes atonement for them. Aaron, the great high priest, makes atonement for them. Like, who else is the great high priest? Jesus makes atonement for us. Like, again, another symbol of what's to come. I love those when you can pick those out and be like, oh, look, there it is again.
Exactly. Yeah.
But this was interesting too. Just another, like, a very, like, don't complain against those who God has placed in leadership. The very ones that were complained against were the ones that made atonement for and saved those who did the complaining. God is like, I have anointed these people, I've put them in charge, and you want to complain against them. You're going to bear the penalty for that. And then the very people they're complaining against are the ones that make atonement for them. Wow. Like, that's powerful.
It is. It very much is. I thought it was interesting as we go along here, the rock thing, and Tim has mentioned this many times, that the second time Moses was supposed to speak to the rock, and that would have been a prefiguration of Christ, of how he had to be slain, but then we can just say a word, and Moses didn't do it right. And there's quite a consequence for that, of him not being able to go into the promised land and see it.
Well, if you think about it, one of Moses's big hesitancies was his ability to speak.
Mm.
He
A good
didn't
one,
want to speak, you know? He's like,
right?
I don't have words. I don't know what to say. And here God is telling him to speak. You know, God is like, just like I spoke creation into existence, you're made in my image. I'm telling you to speak. I'm empowering you to speak. And Moses is like, nah, the staff worked last time. I think I'm going to use the staff again. He's walking in unbelief. God said, I'm telling you to say this thing. I'm telling you to speak out in sound. You know, sound does something to the rock. And instead, he smacks it with his staff because of unbelief, is what it says. So that kind of came to me, like, I'm thinking about it. His biggest hangup was he did he didn't value his words. He didn't value his ability to say the right thing. Well, that's why he didn't want to go to Pharaoh. Who am I? I can't speak. And God is telling him to speak. And he's like, I'll pass.
Well, it has dire consequences because he doesn't get to the promised
Right?
land because of the disobedience.
Yep.
But yeah. And then we have Balaam and a donkey talking. We don't
Yeah.
need to go into too much of that, but it is funny. Balaam's reaction is just to be irked. Like, it doesn't stop him in any way, shape, or form that the
Right.
donkey has just saved his life.
Yeah. This one, I don't know. There's some confusing things in here to me. It's like Balak hires Balaam to curse Israel. 3 times he blesses them, and Balak's finally like, forget it.
I always found it funny that he didn't
God's
kill Balaam immediately. Eventually, it's
well,
Israel that. And but why didn't Balak, like, is Balaam going, dude, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to curse them and this weird thing is happening. Like, is there
yeah,
more? But he doesn't immediately, like, if you're a king and you're in power, maybe you don't want to tick off a wizard or something. I don't know. Maybe that's not a
yeah.
prudent to do. But I was always surprised that he doesn't kill him.
'Cause what's interesting is Balak comes to hire Balaam to curse Israel, but God won't let him. He's like, no, won't let me curse you. But then God tells Balaam to go and only do as I'm commanded. So he goes And then God gets mad at him and sends an angel to stop him. It's like, why would God send an angel to stop him if he told him to go? So the idea is apparently he was
Well, did
being
he tell him
reckless.
to set off? Did he tell him, I mean, and this is where language matters, like, what does it actually say? And it says that
Right.
he says, "No, I couldn't go," but he asks again, and he asks again. That night, this is, 22:20. That night, God came to Balaam and told him, "Since these men have come for you, get up and go with them, but do
Yeah,
only
he
what I
tells
tell
him
you
to
to do."
go,
Well,
right?
he says to go, but he doesn't say to go to Balak. He says, "Go with them and do what I tell you." And then
Yeah. So maybe that's
so
the
so maybe it was like, "I've got a donkey, I've got a passageway, I've got everything ready, and I'm gonna talk to you, like, I'm gonna show you." I don't know.
Yeah, well, in the when God is speaking to him through the angel and such, God says he's angry because he was being reckless and rushing along, rushing headlong into things.
Yeah.
So, but God told him to go. It's kind of one of those things that it feels like we're missing some things, Feels like we're
Yeah, some
missing some,
details maybe about
yeah,
the
some details.
situation.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Which, I mean, we've got what we've got, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's an interesting one. Definitely, obviously, it's a very, very famous passage that a donkey talks, because the last time an animal talked was in the garden, and so it seems relatively significant. But this is as before the children of Israel have taken the promised land. They've been promised. Edom won't let
Right.
them pass. They're fighting
Right.
with Sihon. There's a lot going on here, and I feel like
Yeah.
it's a significant thing that
Mhm.
the donkey's talking to Balaam and not the children of Israel. But
And
evidently
then
animals
Balak
can
doesn't
talk.
like what he says, and so he's like, "Here, let's try it from over here. Maybe you'll like this vantage point better, and you'll get a different message coming out of your mouth." Like, he was
Right?
trying so hard. Like, just
He was.
curse
Which
these
again,
people.
that's why I'm like, why wouldn't you just be like, "All right, off with your head, Balak."
So
Anyway,
Balak is angry, and Balaam is like, "Hey, I warned you. Like, I can only say what God says I can say, and I
right? And
tried to warn you." So, and
but
then he prophesies Edom's demise, and
But that comes back to your point of we're missing something here. Like there's more going on, or there's more details that we haven't been given the backstory to. I'm not saying that the Bible isn't correct. I'm just saying there's more information if you saw it from a different perspective. There's a lot there. And maybe, and this happened to me with Leviticus, maybe as you read it, study it, and unpack it more, maybe by this time next year we'll have more to say on it.
it's definitely one of those stories that makes you go like, interesting."
It does. Well, Carmen, thank you for your 3 visits. You have been such a blessing and appreciate you.
Yes, I love it. It's great.
Take care, my dear.
Thank you.